Without Conscience, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us by Robert D. Hare, Ph.D. Picture this. You meet someone new. They're magnetic, funny, maybe even a little too perfect. They lock eyes with you in a way that makes you feel truly seen, truly understood. Their stories are captivating, their dreams ambitious and inspiring. There's an instant click, a connection that feels rare and special. It feels wonderful, doesn't it? Like you've stumbled upon someone extraordinary. But here's the unsettling part. What if underneath all that polish, there's actually emptiness? No genuine warmth, no real empathy, no moral compass whatsoever. What if that charm is simply a tool, wielded as deliberately as a lockpick, designed to access your trust, your wallet, maybe even your heart, only to extract what they need before vanishing, leaving chaos and confusion in their wake? Sounds like a thriller novel, right? The kind of thing that couldn't happen in real life. Except it does, all the time. These people exist, they move among us, and we call them psychopaths. Understanding them isn't some morbid curiosity or academic rabbit hole. It's actually essential knowledge for navigating our complicated world. Today we're exploring a genuinely groundbreaking book, Without Conscience, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us, by Dr. Robert D. Hare. This isn't just a book about psychopathy. For decades, it's been the definitive guide, written by the very researcher who created the gold standard tool used worldwide to identify this condition. It's sold millions of copies, been translated into countless languages, and fundamentally reshaped how psychology professionals, criminologists, and law enforcement understand this deeply unsettling personality disorder. Dr. Hare spent 25 years immersed in this shadowy territory, not observing from some ivory tower, but engaging face-to-face, trying to decode the puzzle of people who function without the internal moral guidance system most of us take for granted. He witnessed confusion not just among everyday people, but even seasoned professionals who dealt with these individuals constantly. He came to realize that our collective inability to recognize psychopathy has devastating consequences for society and crushingly personal impacts on individual lives. So why should you, someone navigating this complex world and figuring out where you fit, care about such a dark subject? Because understanding the extremes of human behavior actually illuminates the entire spectrum. It sharpens your perception, helps you spot manipulation when it's happening, and ultimately gives you tools to protect yourself, emotionally, physically, and financially. Over the next half hour, I'll guide you through Dr. Hare's fascinating and occasionally unnerving insights. We'll explore who these individuals really are, what makes them tick, or more accurately, what doesn't, and why they can be so dangerously compelling. By the end, you'll have a much clearer picture of this complex disorder, and perhaps you'll view the world and the people in it through slightly sharper, wiser eyes. Let's dive in together. Dr. Hare opens his exploration not with dry clinical definitions, but with lived experience. He shares a story from his early career, fresh from graduate school in the 1960s, when he landed a job as the only psychologist at a maximum security prison. He was young, inexperienced, and completely unprepared for what awaited him. On his very first day, an inmate showed up at his office door. Let's call him Ray. Ray was tall, energetic, and possessed an unnervingly intense, unwavering eye contact that made the young psychologist feel as though he'd never truly looked anyone in the eye before. Without any preamble, Ray launched right in. "Hey, Doc, I've got a problem. I need your help." Eager to begin his therapeutic work, the psychologist invited him to share what was troubling him. What happened next wasn't a confession of inner turmoil or psychological struggle. Ray casually pulled out a knife and waved it in front of the psychologist's nose, maintaining that piercing gaze and wearing an unsettling smile. The psychologist froze, his hand hovering near the emergency button, painfully aware that Ray could see it too. But something, maybe sensing this was a test, maybe realizing help wouldn't arrive quickly enough anyway, stopped him from pressing it. Ray then explained the knife wasn't meant for the psychologist at all, but for another inmate who'd been bothering his. protégé. Ray wasn't seeking counseling or therapeutic support. He was sizing up the new guy, testing boundaries. Would this fresh psychologist report the weapon and follow prison protocol? Or would he keep quiet to build rapport? The young Dr. Hare chose silence. And just like that, Ray had him figured out, a soft touch, someone who could be worked. For the next 8 months, Ray made his life absolutely miserable, with constant demands and elaborate schemes. He conned the psychologist into supporting a kitchen transfer, supposedly to pursue his newfound passion for cooking. The real motive? Access to ingredients for brewing prison alcohol. An exploding still under the warden's table eventually exposed Ray's true culinary interests. Undeterred, Ray soon charmed his way into the prison auto shop. Ray possessed this incredible gift for talking, lying, and manipulating with a smoothness that could disarm even veteran prison staff. He'd weave tales of personal transformation and discovered passions, directly contradicting his lengthy criminal record, without even a flicker of embarrassment. When confronted with evidence from his own file, caught red-handed in a lie, he'd simply pivot, change subjects, completely unfazed. Before leaving that prison, the psychologist nearly fell for Ray's earnest plea to help him land a job with the psychologist's own father, only to be saved by the cynical laughter of experienced guards who'd seen Ray's routine many times before. The final twist came when the psychologist had his aging car repaired in the very auto shop where Ray worked. On the long drive to his new university position, the car mysteriously developed multiple problems. Ball bearings mysteriously lodged in the carburetor, a tampered radiator hose, and, most chillingly, a brake line that had been subtly damaged and failed completely during a long downhill stretch. Coincidence? Dr. Hare seriously doubted it. Years later, while registering students at his university, Dr. Hare overheard a familiar voice boasting to another professor, "Yeah, I worked as Dr. Hare's assistant at the penitentiary. Did all his paperwork. We had a great working relationship. It was Ray, attempting to con his way into university, using fraudulent transcripts." When confronted directly, Ray didn't miss a single beat, just offered a breezy, "Hey, Doc, how's it going?" before seamlessly continuing his fabricated story to the other professor. This encounter, this baffling ability of Ray to simply override reality without any apparent discomfort, sparked the question that would drive Dr. Hare's entire life's work. What kind of psychological makeup allows someone to operate this way? Ray's story, though containing a certain dark humor in retrospect, offers just one window into the world Dr. Hare meticulously maps out in, without conscience. These individuals, the psychopaths, aren't the raving psychos of cheap horror movies. They're often outwardly normal, sometimes even exceptionally charming and successful. As writer William March once observed, these monsters of real life usually looked and behaved in a more normal manner than their actually normal brothers and sisters. They presented a more convincing picture of virtue than virtue presented of itself. Dr. Hare defines psychopathy as a personality disorder characterized by a specific cluster of behaviors and personality traits. Think of it as a syndrome, a collection of symptoms that consistently appear together. He stresses that diagnosing someone is serious business, requiring extensive evidence and careful evaluation. And importantly, not everyone described in the book, especially those drawn from media reports, is definitively a psychopath, but their actions illuminate key traits worth understanding. So what exactly are these traits? Dr. Hare developed a diagnostic tool called the Psychopathy Checklist, or PCLR, now used worldwide to bring clarity and scientific reliability to diagnosis. This instrument identifies two main clusters of characteristics: emotional and interpersonal traits, and social deviance or lifestyle traits. For a true diagnosis, you need significant evidence of both clusters working together. Let's explore the emotional and interpersonal dimension first. One of the most immediately striking features is being glib and superficially charming. Psychopaths can be incredibly witty, articulate, and entertaining conversationalists. They spin convincing, often self-aggrandizing stories with remarkable ease. Think of the smooth-talking con artist who effortlessly talks his way into loans, prestigious jobs, or romantic relationships. They typically present themselves exceptionally well, seeming likable and genuinely engaging. However, sharp observers might detect something slightly off, a certain slickness, a performative quality, as if they're talented actors delivering well-rehearsed lines. They might pepper their speech with impressive-sounding jargon from psychology, law, or business, trying to appear knowledgeable, but lacking genuine depth or understanding. A particularly telling sign is their complete lack of concern when caught in exaggerations or outright lies. Remember Ray casually boasting about being Dr. Hare's assistant, even when confronted? Completely unfazed. Truman Capote, in Cold Blood, brilliantly captured Dick Hickok's effortless ability to con a store clerk into giving him cash back on a worthless check through sheer breezy confidence. It's a performance, often an exceptionally convincing one. Jeffrey MacDonald, the physician convicted of murdering his family, could describe those horrific events in a detached, glib manner that absolutely stunned observers and investigators. This superficial charm pairs naturally with a deeply egocentric and grandiose sense of self-worth. Psychopaths possess a profoundly narcissistic view of their own importance and superiority. They genuinely see themselves as the center of the universe, exceptional beings, naturally justified in living by their own personal rules. "I follow my own laws," one flatly told Dr. Hare. They consistently come across as arrogant, opinionated, cocky, thriving on power and control. They rarely feel genuine embarrassment about their problems, legal troubles, financial disasters, personal failures, viewing them merely as temporary setbacks caused by bad luck or other people's stupidity. They might enthusiastically describe grand plans, becoming a business tycoon, a crusading lawyer for the poor, with absolutely zero realistic understanding of how to achieve them. One inmate, Jack, who scored maximally on the psychopathy checklist, had bounced carelessly from petty theft to burglary to armed robbery, viewing his victims with pure contempt. They always get back more than they lost in insurance anyway. Despite being overweight and completely out of shape after years behind bars, he confidently planned to become a professional competitive swimmer immediately upon release. This grandiosity isn't just empty talk. Given the right victims and circumstances, it can fuel spectacular, albeit highly destructive, success, like the charismatic entrepreneur who thinks big, exclusively with other people's money. Perhaps the most defining emotional characteristic is a profound lack of remorse or guilt. Psychopaths demonstrate a truly stunning lack of concern for the devastation they cause others. They often state quite calmly and clearly that they feel no guilt whatsoever, aren't sorry, and honestly see no reason why they should be. One inmate, when asked about viciously stabbing a robbery victim, retorted dismissively, "Get real. He spends a few months in a hospital and I rot here. I actually gave him a break." Ted Bundy coldly dismissed guilt as merely an unhealthy social control mechanism designed to manipulate people. Even when they occasionally verbalize remorse, perhaps at a parole hearing, it consistently rings hollow, contradicted immediately by their other words or subsequent actions. Prison inmates quickly learn that saying, "I'm sorry," might help their case, but any probing reveals absolutely no genuine feeling behind those rehearsed words. Some even rationalize their horrific actions by blaming their victims or grossly minimizing the actual harm caused. Jack Abbott, the writer famously championed by Norman Mailer, who later murdered a young waiter, claimed the fatal stabbing was merely an accident and denied feeling any remorse, casually stating the victim had no real future anyway. This absence of guilt connects directly to a remarkable ability to rationalize any behavior and completely shrug off personal responsibility. They readily deploy convenient excuses like memory loss, dissociative amnesia, multiple personality disorder, or temporary insanity. John Wayne Gacy, who brutally murdered 33 young men and boys, somehow portrayed himself as the 34th victim someone tragically cheated out of his own childhood. Closely linked to this lack of guilt is a profound lack of empathy. Psychopaths seem fundamentally unable to truly understand or share other people's feelings, except perhaps on a coldly intellectual level. Other people's emotions simply don't register as important or worthy of consideration. They view people essentially as objects, to be strategically used for personal gratification, frequently targeting the weak and vulnerable. One rapist genuinely struggled to comprehend his victims' terror, saying with apparent confusion, "I'd been scared myself, and honestly, it wasn't particularly unpleasant." This empathy deficit isn't selective or situational. It extends equally to family members and complete strangers. Family ties, when maintained at all, are typically possessive in nature, viewing spouses or children more like property than separate human beings. This profound inability to appreciate others' emotional experiences enables behavior that seems absolutely horrific and utterly baffling to psychologically normal people, ranging from callous emotional abuse and parasitic exploitation to, in the most extreme cases, torture and murder performed with roughly the same emotional investment one might feel carving a Thanksgiving turkey. Naturally flowing from these traits is a marked tendency toward deceit and manipulation. Lying comes as effortlessly as breathing to psychopaths. They're completely unfazed by the prospect of being caught. When challenged or confronted, they'll simply change their story on the fly, or creatively twist facts to somehow fit the lie, often leaving the listener utterly confused and doubting their own perception. Much of their lying appears motivated by nothing deeper than the sheer pleasure of successfully duping someone. They actually seem proud of their lying abilities. Janine Jones, the nurse ultimately convicted of murdering infants under her care, skillfully manipulated reality itself, casually contradicting documented facts and even her own previous statements, thoroughly convinced that her mouth's gonna get me out of this. Sometimes the lies are so blatant and delivered so nonchalantly that you genuinely question whether the speaker might be detached from reality. One inmate, nicknamed Motormouth by researchers, could spin an entirely fabricated life story. Commercial pilot at 15, lived on 4 continents, professional deep-sea diver. So convincingly that even experienced, skeptical interviewers were initially impressed and taken in. Given this remarkable ease with deception, it's hardly surprising they excel at cheating, elaborate fraud schemes, sophisticated cons, and psychological manipulation, feeling absolutely no hesitation about ruthlessly exploiting others' weaknesses or vulnerabilities. Ted Bundy notoriously used fake injuries, a leg cast, an arm sling, to lure compassionate young women into helping him carry books or load items into his car, cynically exploiting their natural kindness to lead them directly to their deaths. That covers the core emotional and interpersonal features. Now let's turn our attention to the second major cluster, the social deviance or lifestyle traits. Psychopaths tend toward high impulsivity. They act on immediate urges, giving remarkably little thought to potential consequences. "I did it because I felt like it right then," is an extremely common explanation. Their actions are predominantly driven by desires for immediate satisfaction or relief, functioning much like an infant demanding instant gratification. While most people gradually learn to delay gratification and consider consequences, psychopaths seem never to truly master this fundamental developmental milestone. They consistently ignore others' needs in relentless pursuit of their own immediate wants. This creates characteristically chaotic lifestyles, abruptly quitting jobs, suddenly breaking off relationships, randomly changing plans, hurting people on pure whim. One research subject robbed a gas station and seriously injured the attendant simply because he didn't feel like walking 6 blocks home to retrieve his wallet for beer money. They live essentially day to day, with little genuine consideration for future consequences. Coupled closely with impulsivity are notably poor behavioral controls. They're highly reactive to perceived slights, insults, or minor frustrations. While most people can successfully inhibit aggressive responses to everyday irritations, psychopaths possess remarkably weak internal controls. Even the slightest provocation can trigger sudden violence, threatening behavior, or explosive verbal abuse. They take offense incredibly easily over utterly trivial matters. An inmate might beat another prisoner nearly senseless over an accidental bump in the cafeteria line, then calmly step back into place as if absolutely nothing unusual had occurred. Importantly, these violent outbursts, though extreme and sometimes shocking, are typically short-lived and seem emotionally cold, lacking the intense emotional arousal most people genuinely experience when losing their temper. They appear to know exactly what they're doing, using aggression instrumentally and strategically. "I consciously decide exactly how much I want to hurt the guy," one matter-of-factly explained. Despite regularly causing serious harm to others, they rarely acknowledge having any kind of temper problem, viewing their aggressive responses as perfectly natural reactions to reasonable provocations. Psychopaths demonstrate a persistent, almost insatiable need for excitement and stimulation. They crave living in the proverbial fast lane, constantly on the edge, typically involving rule-breaking and risk-taking. They're easily bored and absolutely cannot tolerate routine, monotony, or predictability. Many chronically abuse drugs, move residences frequently, or change jobs constantly in endless search of novelty and thrills. Doing crime itself often becomes a primary source of excitement and stimulation. One woman described walking through airports carrying drugs as literally the most exciting thing in her life. Another thoroughly enjoyed the adrenaline rush of working as a violent enforcer, even deliberately provoking bar fights purely for stimulation when things felt too quiet. This chronic need for thrills makes them spectacularly ill-suited for occupations requiring patience, meticulousness, sustained attention, or reliability. Bomb disposal experts, for instance, explicitly referred to psychopaths as unreliable cowboys who endangered entire teams. They make terrible intelligence operatives and poor organized crime members, where their dangerous impulsivity makes them unpredictable loose cannons nobody wants to rely on. Unsurprisingly, psychopaths consistently demonstrate a marked lack of responsibility across all life domains. Obligations and commitments mean essentially nothing to them. Promises are casually made, and just as casually broken without a second thought. Their lives are typically littered with defaulted loans, ignored financial obligations, and completely unpaid child support stretching back years. This profound unreliability permeates absolutely every area: chronically erratic job performance, systematic misuse of company resources, casual violation of organizational policies and procedures. They fundamentally don't honor commitments to people, organizations, institutions, or principles. Diane Downs, for instance, frequently left her young children completely alone or neglected their most basic needs for extended periods, all while loudly professing maternal love and demonstrating shocking indifference to their actual welfare. This callous indifference toward children's well-being appears remarkably common among psychopathic parents. Children are frequently viewed primarily as inconveniences or burdens. They routinely exploit family members and friends without hesitation, manipulating parents into posting substantial bail money they have absolutely no intention of honoring, leaving devastated loved ones to face serious financial consequences. They show strikingly little concern for the very real risks their reckless actions pose to innocent others, like the man with literally dozens of dangerous driving convictions who fully intended to keep driving regardless, because, as he reasoned, it takes two people to have an accident. HIV-positive psychopaths have been documented continuing unprotected sexual activity without disclosure, showing zero concern for potentially condemning partners to death. Even when placed under direct, intensive supervision of the justice system through probation or parole conditions, they routinely ignore court-imposed restrictions, as if they simply don't apply. Most psychopaths exhibit serious early behavioral problems that emerge long before adolescence. Persistent lying, systematic cheating, theft, deliberate fire setting, chronic truancy, early substance abuse, vandalism, violence toward peers, bullying, repeatedly running away, and unusually precocious sexuality are common patterns. While many children exhibit some of these behaviors occasionally, the psychopath's developmental history is typically far more extensive, severe, and varied, even when directly compared to siblings raised in the identical family environment. Deliberate cruelty to animals stands out as a particularly ominous early warning sign. Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood activities included impaling a dog's severed head on a stick for display and methodically staking neighborhood cats to trees. Adult psychopaths often recount such disturbing incidents completely matter-of-factly, sometimes even with nostalgic amusement. One chuckled warmly while describing repeatedly shooting a neighborhood dog with a pellet gun. Another casually described batting cats around a pole with a tennis racket like some twisted game. This cruelty frequently extends to other children as well, fueled by that same fundamental absence of empathy. While not every adult psychopath necessarily demonstrated extreme cruelty to animals, virtually all had childhoods and adolescence marked by an unusually wide range and high frequency of problematic, antisocial behaviors. These deeply entrenched early problems typically blossom predictably into adult antisocial behavior patterns. Psychopaths view society's rules and norms as inconvenient impediments to getting what they want. The impulsive, deceitful, unempathetic child essentially becomes the same person as an adult, demonstrating remarkable lifelong continuity of self-serving, persistently antisocial conduct. Much of this behavior inevitably leads to criminal convictions. Even within prison populations, already selected for antisocial behavior, psychopaths noticeably stand out for the sheer frequency and variety of their criminal offenses. They tend toward criminal versatility, opportunistically trying their hand at virtually everything rather than developing specialized criminal expertise. However, crucially, not all psychopaths end up incarcerated. Many successfully operate indefinitely on the shady fringes of legality, running phony stock promotions, engaging in questionable business practices, systematically abusing spouses or children. Still others engage in behavior that, while perhaps not technically illegal, is clearly unethical, immoral, or genuinely harmful to others. Serial infidelity, deliberate family neglect, systematic misuse of company funds for personal benefit. It's absolutely crucial to remember that possessing some of these individual traits doesn't automatically make someone a psychopath. Many otherwise healthy people might be somewhat impulsive, occasionally irresponsible, or lack empathy in certain specific situations or contexts. Psychopathy is fundamentally about the syndrome, the persistent clustering and combination of most of these traits across both dimensions, the emotional, interpersonal deficits, and the lifestyle/antisocial patterns together. It's this particular combination that creates the distinct, highly destructive pattern Dr. Hare so carefully describes. This naturally raises a fundamental question. If psychopaths genuinely lack empathy, remorse, and the deep emotional connections that form the very foundation of conscience for most people, what exactly, if anything, is guiding or regulating their behavior? Dr. Hare argues persuasively that the critical, missing piece is functional internal controls, what we'd normally call conscience. Most of us gradually learn, through childhood socialization, to internalize society's moral rules and behavioral expectations. This developmental process helps form our conscience, that persistent inner voice that makes us naturally resist temptation and feel genuinely guilty when we transgress important norms. This internal policeman effectively regulates our behavior, even when absolutely no external authority is watching or enforcement is possible. It's fundamentally what allows complex society to function reasonably smoothly. For psychopaths, however, this critical developmental process apparently fails almost completely. They might intellectually know the stated rules, can perhaps recite them on demand, but they utterly lack the inner emotional voice, the moral weight, that compels actual adherence or creates discomfort with violation. They experience little internal resistance to temptation, and virtually no guilt afterward when they transgress. Without what Dr. Hare calls the shackles of a nagging conscience, they feel essentially free to do whatever they calculate they can get away with to satisfy immediate needs or desires. Why is their conscience so profoundly weak, assuming it exists at all in any meaningful sense? Dr. Hare suggests several interconnected possibilities supported by decades of research. First, psychopaths appear to have a significantly diminished biological capacity to experience fear and anxiety, the very emotions that fundamentally underpin normal conscience formation. For most people, childhood punishment gradually creates strong psychological links between forbidden behaviors and anxiety. Eventually, the mere contemplation of the forbidden act itself triggers anxiety, which powerfully suppresses the behavior before it occurs. In psychopaths, these critical emotional links appear remarkably weak or essentially absent. Threats of punishment simply don't deter them effectively. This neurological difference helps explain why traditional punishment-based approaches so consistently fail to modify their behavior. Second, their inner speech, the way they mentally talk to themselves about actions and consequences, appears to lack normal emotional weight or resonance. When a psychopath intellectually considers potential consequences, thinking, if I do this specific action, X negative outcome might occur, that thought apparently doesn't carry anywhere near the same emotional impact or genuine deterrent force it would automatically carry for non-psychopaths. Third, fascinating research on their language processing patterns strongly suggests that emotionally charged words simply don't resonate with them the way they naturally do for others. In carefully controlled experiments measuring brain electrical responses and reaction times to different word categories, psychopaths process intensely emotional words like death, rape, or torture, much more like they process neutral words such as table or chair. It's as if the emotional coloring, the deeper human significance these words carry, is simply missing or inaccessible to them neurologically. They know the dictionary definition, can use the words correctly in sentences, but they don't hear or feel the emotional music behind them. This profound disconnect between language and emotion helps explain their disturbing ability to say, I love you, immediately after inflicting terrible pain, or to describe absolutely horrific acts with chilling, inappropriate detachment, as if discussing the weather. Their conscience, if it speaks at all, speaks only in empty words utterly devoid of emotional meaning. This doesn't mean psychopaths are simple automatons, or robots blindly responding to primitive impulses. They clearly can follow rules and social norms when it suits them, but they consciously pick and choose based purely on calculated self-interest and rational assessment of risk versus reward, completely unburdened by the anxieties, moral doubts, and genuine concerns for others' well-being that naturally guide most people's behavioral choices. This unique psychological and neurological makeup makes crime, for many psychopaths, a genuinely logical and attractive choice. While many complex factors can lead people toward criminal behavior, crushing poverty, severe childhood abuse, addiction, crimes of passion driven by intense emotion, psychopaths often commit crimes simply because it pays well, it's relatively easy, or it's exciting and stimulating. Their fundamental personality structure, essentially devoid of functional internal controls and empathy, naturally aligns with opportunistically taking advantage of situations regardless of social rules or others' welfare. They demonstrate no genuine loyalty to groups, criminal codes, or even criminal partners beyond the principle of looking out for number one, which ironically makes them quite useful as informants but absolutely terrible as reliable partners in organized crime. Their disproportionately heavy involvement in crime relative to their numbers is truly striking. While constituting perhaps only 1% of the general population, though estimates vary by study and methodology, they make up approximately 15 to 25% of incarcerated populations and are conservatively estimated to be responsible for upwards of 50% of serious repeat criminal offenses. Their violence is particularly noteworthy and disturbing, frequently callous, purely instrumental, emotionally cold-blooded, deployed simply as an efficient tool to obtain what they want, whether that's money, sexual gratification, or merely silencing an inconvenient witness or perceived obstacle. Unlike violence genuinely born of intense emotion, fear, or desperation, their calculated aggression often distinctly lacks that normal emotional coloring or arousal. This psychological profile makes them particularly dangerous as repeat offenders. Studies consistently demonstrate that diagnosed psychopaths recidivate, commit new offenses after release from prison, at rates approximately 2 to 3 times higher than other convicted criminals, especially for violent offenses. This powerful predictive validity of psychopathy diagnosis has become crucial for criminal justice system decisions, particularly regarding parole eligibility, sentencing length, and risk assessment. A common hopeful question people ask is whether psychopaths might eventually grow out of it or mature into better behavior. Research findings indicate that their overt, especially violent, criminal activity does tend to peak during young adulthood and often decreases quite significantly around age 40. However, this apparent burnout phenomenon seems primarily related to reduction in high-energy, impulsive, physically demanding crimes requiring youthful vigor. The underlying core personality traits, the profound egocentricity, callousness, manipulation, lack of empathy, typically remain essentially stable throughout the lifespan. They may simply learn subtler, less overtly criminal or physically demanding methods to satisfy their exploitative needs, perhaps transitioning into what researchers call subcriminal psychopathy rather than completely reforming. This brings us naturally to the concept of the white-collar or subcriminal psychopath, a particularly important and under-recognized category. These are individuals who possess the core defining personality traits and emotional deficits, but, perhaps due to higher intelligence, advantageous family background, superior social skills, or sheer luck, manage to operate successfully within mainstream society, often achieving considerable positions of power, status, or wealth, without ever being formally convicted of crimes. They might be the ruthlessly exploitative business executive, the systematically unethical lawyer, the cynically manipulative politician, the predatory physician or therapist who exploits vulnerable patients. Their behavior might hover in gray areas, not technically meeting legal definitions of crime, but clearly violating ethical standards, professional norms, and basic human decency, while leaving behind a devastating trail of psychologically destroyed people, ruined careers, shattered families, and tremendous emotional devastation. John Grambling Jr., the man who systematically defrauded major banks of millions using pure charm, forged credentials, and fabricated documents, perfectly exemplifies this dangerous type. His prosecutor astutely noted, though his tools are genteel and his methods sophisticated, his core instincts are as fundamentally savage as any street brute. These individuals skillfully exploit the trust inherently built into social institutions and professional relationships, finding exceptionally rich feeding grounds in areas like high finance, corporate leadership, politics, and disturbingly, even helping professions like therapy or medicine, where people's vulnerability is highest and trust is essential. Their continued success heavily relies on maintaining a thoroughly convincing facade of normalcy and respectability, while strategically manipulating those above them and potentially ruthlessly abusing those below. So if psychopathy characteristically starts early in childhood, involves fundamental deficits in conscience and empathy, and consistently links to extremely high rates of crime and interpersonal harm, the absolutely crucial question becomes, can anything actually be done? Can treatment work? Dr. Hare addresses this critical question with sobering, hard-won realism, born from decades of research and clinical observation. Historically, virtually all traditional forms of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, group therapy, client-centered therapy, insight-oriented approaches, have proven largely ineffective or even counterproductive. Biological interventions, including psychiatric medications or even historical psychosurgery approaches, haven't produced better outcomes. Why is meaningful treatment so exceptionally difficult, perhaps impossible? Several fundamental factors stand out clearly. First, the basic underlying premise of virtually all psychotherapy is that the patient experiences subjective distress, genuinely wants professional help, and desires personal change. Psychopaths characteristically don't feel distressed by their condition. They honestly see nothing particularly wrong with themselves and have absolutely no internal motivation or desire to change their personality. They frequently view therapy sessions as an elaborate joke, and therapists as merely new objects to be strategically manipulated for advantage. Second, Their fundamental personality structure appears extraordinarily resistant to modification through any known intervention. Third, they typically enter treatment programs only under external duress, court orders, parole conditions, pressure from family, never from genuine internal motivation. Fourth, they fundamentally lack the psychological capacity for the emotional introspection, genuine vulnerability, and authentic interpersonal connection absolutely required for virtually all effective therapeutic approaches. Worse still, some well-intentioned treatment programs might actually make psychopaths more sophisticated and therefore more dangerous. Group therapy settings, particularly those specifically focused on developing empathy or deeply understanding interpersonal motivations and emotions, can inadvertently function as advanced training, providing psychopaths with powerful new insights into human psychological vulnerabilities and significantly better, more refined techniques for manipulation and exploitation. They learn therapeutic jargon, socially acceptable excuses and rationalizations. I was severely abused as a child. I have unresolved trauma, cynically using therapy as essentially a finishing school for more sophisticated antisocial manipulation skills. Rigorous studies of intensive therapeutic community programs disturbingly found that psychopaths who actively participated in treatment were actually significantly more likely to violently reoffend after release compared to untreated psychopathic control groups who received no intervention. This genuinely bleak picture applies primarily to treating adults with fully developed psychopathy. What about early intervention with at-risk children showing emerging signs? While still exceptionally difficult, this approach holds slightly more realistic promise. Programs intensely focusing on systematically changing specific problematic behaviors like childhood aggression, while simultaneously teaching concrete pro-social strategies for need satisfaction, especially if implemented very early in development and involving tight structure, consistent consequences, and intensive parental involvement and supervision, might achieve some measurable positive behavioral effects. However, even apparently successful behavioral modifications may not fundamentally touch or alter the core underlying emotional deficits in empathy and attachment. Dr. Hare doesn't advocate completely giving up on all treatment research and efforts. He correctly notes that much historical research on psychopathy treatment was seriously methodologically flawed, often lacking clear diagnostic criteria, appropriate control groups, or adequate follow-up periods. Remarkably few programs have been specifically designed for psychopaths from the ground up, truly acknowledging and addressing their unique motivational structure and mindset. He thoughtfully outlines principles for potentially more effective programs, focusing less on the likely impossible goal of somehow developing genuine empathy or conscience, and more on rigorously convincing psychopaths, through intensive structure, swift consistent consequences, and calculated appeals to self-interest, that consistently pro-social behavior actually serves their own long-term self-interest better than continued antisocial behavior. Such realistically designed programs would require truly immense resources, exceptionally tight security and control, extensive long-term post-release supervision, and crucially, keeping expectations for fundamental personality change quite modest and realistic. This difficult reality leaves us, especially those who encounter psychopaths in personal relationships rather than professional settings, with a challenging situation. If fundamental personality change is genuinely unlikely, regardless of intervention, the necessary focus must shift decisively towards self-protection and pragmatic damage control. Dr. Hare offers crucial, potentially life-saving advice in what he frames as a practical survival guide. First and absolutely foremost, know precisely what you are dealing with. Thoroughly understand these traits, recognize the patterns, appreciate the very real potential for manipulation and harm. Education and awareness are genuinely your first essential line of defense, though even seasoned experts with decades of experience can still occasionally be fooled by skilled psychopaths. Second, try consciously not to be overly influenced by superficial props and presentation. Be appropriately wary of overwhelming charm, uncomfortably intense eye contact, flashy appearances, expensive possessions, or overly dramatic body language. These are frequently deliberate tools of distraction and strategic manipulation. If you feel strangely captivated, intimidated, or emotionally manipulated by someone's presentation style. Try temporarily closing your eyes and simply listening critically to the actual content and consistency of what they're saying, ignoring the performance. Trust your gut instinct. If someone's stare feels predatory, threatening, or distinctly unsettling rather than warmly engaging. Third, don't wear metaphorical blinkers or let hope override caution. Enter new relationships, especially those that seem remarkably too good to be true, from the very beginning, with appropriate caution and healthy skepticism. Do some reasonable background checking. Ask straightforward questions about their personal history, family relationships, employment record, past relationships. Vague answers, evasiveness, obvious inconsistencies, or hostility to reasonable questions should immediately raise significant red flags. Fourth, keep your guard up, particularly in high-risk situations and environments. Places where people are characteristically lonely, actively seeking excitement or romance, or temporarily away from their usual social support systems and normal judgment, like singles bars, vacation resorts, online dating platforms, foreign travel destinations, are prime hunting grounds for skilled predators actively seeking vulnerable targets. Fifth, know yourself deeply and honestly. Genuinely understand your own specific psychological vulnerabilities. Are you particularly susceptible to flattery? Currently lonely and craving connection? Perhaps too trusting by nature? Do you harbor a bit of larceny in your own soul, making you vulnerable to, too good to be true, schemes? Psychopaths are exceptionally skilled at rapidly spotting and ruthlessly exploiting precisely these individual weaknesses and unmet needs. Be extra critical and skeptical of anyone who seems to cater almost perfectly to your deepest psychological needs, insecurities, or secret desires right from the very beginning. If you're already entangled in a relationship with a suspected psychopath, practical damage control becomes absolutely essential for your well-being. Obtain professional advice and support specifically from clinicians or counselors with demonstrated experience dealing with psychopathy, not just general relationship counseling. Be persistent in seeking help, as unfortunately, many well-meaning professionals may also be initially fooled by the psychopath's convincing facade and charm. Don't waste energy blaming yourself for the situation. Their destructive behavior fundamentally reflects their personality disorder, not your personal failings or inadequacy. Recognize clearly who the real victim is in the situation. Don't waste precious sympathy or emotional energy on their strategic self-pity or victim narratives designed to manipulate you. Realize you are definitely not alone. Actively try to connect with others who may have been similarly victimized by this same individual. Comparing experiences can be both validating and protective. Be extremely careful about engaging in direct power struggles. Psychopaths have an overwhelming need to win and maintain control, often resorting readily to escalating intimidation, threats, or even violence when challenged. Sometimes, understanding this dynamic allows for strategic, carefully planned disengagement, though it can be genuinely risky and should involve professional guidance. Set absolutely firm ground rules and boundaries, then enforce them consistently without exception, whether that means permanently refusing further financial bailouts, insisting on clear relationship boundaries, or limiting contact. Don't realistically expect dramatic positive changes or genuine reform. Personality structure is deeply ingrained and remarkably stable, and any apparent improvements are typically temporary, superficial, or purely strategic manipulation. Ultimately, you may genuinely need to cut your losses completely and exit the relationship entirely to preserve your own emotional health, financial stability, and even physical safety. This decision is incredibly difficult and painful, especially for parents dealing with psychopathic children, but sometimes becomes absolutely necessary for personal survival and well-being. Finally, actively use support groups. Connecting regularly with others who truly understand from personal experience can be invaluable for maintaining perspective and emotional strength. Dr. Hare concludes his sobering, eye-opening exploration with a strong call for dramatically increased research funding and effort. Despite decades of solid study, the fundamental biological and developmental mysteries of psychopathy remain largely unsolved. Compared to disorders causing far less social harm, research funding and scientific effort devoted to understanding psychopathy have been disproportionately small and inadequate. Truly understanding the neurological and developmental roots and developing genuinely effective early intervention strategies is absolutely crucial if we realistically hope to significantly mitigate the devastating and widespread impact of individuals living truly without conscience. Reading without conscience is genuinely a powerful and honestly, sometimes deeply disturbing experience. Dr. Hare doesn't sensationalize or exaggerate for effect, yet the clinical reality he carefully presents is stark and unsettling. What tends to stay with you long after finishing the book isn't just the dramatic profiles of notorious criminals, but rather the chilling recognition that these specific traits, the surface charm, the strategic manipulation, the profound absence of empathy, can easily exist behind perfectly normal, even outwardly successful and admired, facades. Why does understanding this dark subject matter so much, especially for someone young, who's just starting to build meaningful relationships and navigate the genuine complexities of the adult world? Because awareness fundamentally equals protection. Understanding that not everyone operates with the same internal moral rules, that some individuals fundamentally lack the capacity for genuine empathy and remorse that you naturally possess, helps you become a significantly more discerning judge of character. It helps you learn to trust your intuition when something feels subtly off about someone, even when you can't immediately articulate exactly why you're uncomfortable. The book powerfully illustrates through case after case how psychopaths systematically exploit normal human qualities like trust, kindness, compassion, and vulnerability. They're natural masters at quickly identifying what people desperately need: affection, validation, excitement, financial security, someone who understands, and skillfully mirroring it back convincingly, creating a powerful, though ultimately deceptive and exploitative, emotional bond. Learning to recognize these manipulation patterns, to look carefully beyond the polished surface presentation, is genuinely an essential life skill for navigating relationships safely. Dr. Hare's work also directly challenges some deeply held societal beliefs and comfortable assumptions, particularly the hopeful idea that everyone is fundamentally capable of positive change if just given enough love, support, understanding, or professional therapy. The hard, uncomfortable truth about psychopathy, strongly supported by decades of research, is that the core personality structure appears extraordinarily resistant to meaningful change through any currently known intervention. This stark reality doesn't mean we should abandon basic human compassion entirely, but it absolutely does mean we need to be realistic and self-protective, especially when our own safety, emotional well-being, or financial security is genuinely at stake. Pouring endless emotional energy into trying to fix or save someone who fundamentally doesn't perceive a problem and lacks the basic capacity for genuine change can be utterly destructive to your own life and well-being. So, what can you practically take away from understanding this challenging material? First, pay close attention to consistent patterns of behavior over time, not just to appealing words or emotional apologies in the moment. Words are remarkably cheap and easy for a psychopath to deploy strategically. Look carefully at actual consistent behavior over extended periods. Do their actions genuinely match their words? Do they ever take real responsibility? Or do they constantly blame circumstances, bad luck, or other people while making endless excuses? Second, learn to trust your gut feelings and intuitive responses. If someone consistently makes you feel uneasy, confused, manipulated, or subtly intimidated, even while being superficially charming or complimentary, pay very serious attention to that persistent feeling. Don't automatically dismiss or override your natural intuition just because someone presents well socially or others seem impressed by them. Third, be particularly wary of pity plays strategically, combined with charm or flattery. Psychopaths frequently use elaborate sob stories or displays of feigned vulnerability, specifically to gain sympathy and strategically lower your natural defenses, only to ruthlessly exploit that misplaced trust later. Genuine human vulnerability has a distinctly different quality from calculated, manipulative vulnerability designed to exploit your compassion. Finally, genuinely understand your own psychological buttons and vulnerabilities. What do you personally crave most intensely? Approval and validation, excitement and adventure, financial security being needed. Knowing your own deepest needs and specific insecurities makes you significantly less susceptible to those who would cynically identify and exploit them for personal gain. Without conscience ultimately isn't about making you cynical, paranoid, or reflexively distrustful of everyone you meet. It's fundamentally about equipping you with knowledge and awareness that can be protective. It's similar to learning about dangerous ocean currents and riptides before swimming in unfamiliar waters. You can still thoroughly enjoy the ocean, but you're appropriately aware of real risks and know how to recognize and avoid them. Understanding psychopathy helps you navigate the complex social world more safely and wisely, allowing you to build genuine, healthy connections based on mutual respect, trust, and authentic empathy, while simultaneously recognizing and effectively protecting yourself from those relatively rare individuals who operate entirely without those essential human qualities. That was our deep dive into the core insights of Without Conscience by Dr. Robert D. Hare. We've explored the chilling characteristics, the underlying psychology, and the profound impact of individuals who navigate the world without the internal moral compass of conscience. We've covered the major insights today, but honestly, a summary like this only scratches the surface. The true weight, nuance, and impact of Dr. Hare's work, the detailed case studies, the rigorous scientific grounding, the decades of careful research, that richness only comes from engaging with the actual book directly. Reading it isn't just about passively learning facts. It's about gaining a perspective that can fundamentally sharpen your understanding of human nature and help you navigate relationships and challenges with much greater clarity and wisdom. If any part of our discussion genuinely resonated with you, if you felt even a flicker of recognition or sparked a deep curiosity to learn more, I genuinely encourage you to pick up your own copy. The link is right there in the description below. Consider it a worthwhile investment in your own awareness, wisdom, and personal safety. And if you found this exploration valuable and thought-provoking, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. We journey through impactful, meaningful books like this regularly, always aiming to uncover wisdom and insights that can genuinely shape our lives for the better. We'd truly love to have you join our growing community as we continue learning and growing together. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and stay wise.